Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, in anticipation of Equalizer 3, we're talking about The Equalizer. Robert McCall reflects many aspects of the work of Jesus. He responds to people who are powerless against the oppression they experience because he's a man who can do something about the evil that exists. How do you become a knight in shining armor in a world where knights no longer exist? You got to be who you are in this world, no matter what. Join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me from cheesy Wisconsin is Jaime Joe Wright. Hey, Jaime, how are you doing today?
I am really good. That was a great intro. I was starting to groove to it.
Yeah, we do a little jam when the intro and the outro music, especially the outro music, because we're like, whew, it's done. We start bebopping and doing a little dance. And, you know, if you've listened to this podcast at all, you know, and at any moment, I'm likely to break out in some off-tune song.
This is true. I'm sure it's going to happen here today. Everybody wait. Just hold your breath. It's coming.
But I wouldn't hold your breath because then you'll pass out and wreck your car and all that stuff. So
yeah, that's true. Well, yeah, don't do it if you're driving.
So I met Jaime, like a year ago now? Something like that?
Has it been that long?
It's probably,
yeah. Yeah, it's been about a year.
She is my social media marketing person. So all you people that are like, man, I love all of your posts on Facebook and Instagram. And I say, thanks. It's not me doing anything. It's all Jaime. She's the one doing it and taking over and making the website look nice and clean and not just like a empty house with nothing in
Without curtains and no carpet.
Hey, I still have.
I think we got the curtains up. We might still have some more interior decorating that we need to
There's
do.
always more that needs to be done.
Always more.
And she's not just a social media marketer. She's actually an author and has written books and won awards and all that stuff. So we'll talk about that at the end. Well, yeah,
I like that.
We'll talk about that. She's a big deal. Oh,
not really.
You're the one singing.
I did. I just broke out jazz hands.
Who knew that Equalizer would bring out jazz hands?
Right. It's synonymous. Equalizer and jazz. They go together.
Yeah.
I think he does play Miles Davis in the movie. Just throwing that out there. I could be wrong.
Probably. Well, he says he was a pip for Gladys Knight, which is not jazz hands.
That's
he
true.
is a dancer.
No, that was not jazz. Yeah.
It's close enough for our purposes.
Close enough.
So, Jaime, before we talk about why you picked Equalizer,
yes,
if you could sort of nutshell your writing style, the themes, like what you love to write about, because I think there's a little bit of overlap with why you picked this movie.
Yeah.
So how would you describe the stories that you love to write?
I love to write stories where you have, sounds horrible, but you have a lot of dark and a lot of darkness, right? But then as you're climbing your way toward the end, you start seeing this tiny pinprick of light, which is the hope that shines in. And I love that concept of coming out of darkness and just bam into the light. And whether that's truth or whether that's hope or whatever element that is, I think we all relate to coming out of dark places. And so that's that. I write Gothic mysteries, thriller, and so lots of haunting and murder and mayhem and all that fun stuff. Literary fun stuff, may I clarify.
You don't actually go around causing mayhem and murder.
No. My research stops at a certain point. I have some limits to research and, it has to do with legal things and stuff like that. So I try to stay conscious of that, but.
So when you look at now sort of that, I love that what you said about that going through these dark times, dark places, and then there is a pinprick of light.
Right.
And whether it's this movie, I remember the conversation we had about Tombstone with Britt a couple months ago, where the conversation where Sam Elliott's like, we're in this town, we're taking advantage of the fact that these people live in terror.
Right.
And I think that's where you see Denzel's character in this movie is sort of sees people living, and not that he even knows, he's not even that connected necessarily with the people, but
Right.
and there's a quote that we'll talk about later where he's like, I can do something about this.
Right. Right.
And he does. So,
right.
So when we talk about Equalizer, and you said what, you've seen this 3 times in the last 6 weeks, both 1 and 2?
Yeah. It's my proudest moment. It is. It really is.
And have you been watching it in the 4K with the Atmos?
Yes. And every gunshot feels like it's been inflicted upon my own personal self. This is what happens. I'm waiting for, I have coffee mugs hanging on the wall, and I'm waiting for them to shatter at one of these days watching the movie. But yeah, I've seen The Equalizer many, many times, but in the last 6 weeks, probably about 2 or 3, 1 and 2. I'm just preparing for this fall, for September 1st, which is probably when we're airing this.
Yeah. Because
it's hit.
Equalizer 3 is going to be coming out today.
Yes.
So hopefully we're trying to get you ready and see, it's this social media marketing dream of, hey, let's do this that ties with the real world bonanza of marketing stuff.
This will be your first podcast that goes viral too. I just know it. I can feel it.
It'd be nice to have one.
The first podcast that gets 100 listeners. Woo, woo.
Hey, we've had 100.
I know. I'm giving you a hard time.
Not many.
Edit that out later. Yeah, we don't need to put that in.
For sure. That's the fun part to edit. It's half the stuff I edit out is actually stuff that makes me laugh so hard.
Oh,
mostly
I know.
because it tends to be the super inappropriate stuff.
Well, yeah.
So when you look at the movie, you've watched it numerous times over the years, and
yes,
even as prep, you've put in extra effort into the homework.
Yes.
What is it that you love about the movie? Why is it you keep going back to it, other than Denzel's amazing?
Oh, Denzel is an amazing actor. Let's just get
I said other than that.
Okay.
That's like a given.
Okay. All right. We won't go off on Denzel then. I love the movies because there's an element of, I don't even want to say an element. It's really based on heroism and this fight to save the underdog or the innocent or the victims. And I love that type of movie where you see someone who doesn't have to get involved use their gifts and their innate instincts of protector to go in and really make sure that not only is this person rescued, but they wreak havoc on the ones that have done the damage. And I think that's the extra part that I like about the Equalizer is there's some justice there that as humans we want to see happen. And in life, a lot of times, at least we don't see it happen. And it feels really good when it does, which maybe isn't a good thing to be cheering. But, yay, people die.
Yeah, he killed that dude with a corkscrew.
Yes.
This movie is not for the squeamish of stomach.
Nope, it's not.
But, if you like John Wick, if you like Taken, if you like The Punisher, or even Batman, it's like that vibe, the vigilante justice.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to think this out loud, is this idea, what is it about the idea of vigilante justice? Like you and I, if somebody does something to us, as you mentioned, you like your books to be murder and mayhem.
Right.
But if we did murder and mayhem tends to be the bad guy realm.
Right.
So what is it that makes us cheer it in this scenario? Whereas, if it's the bad guy doing it, we don't. And we'll talk about the synopsis of The Equalizer here in just a second. If you're unfamiliar with the film.
Yeah. Well, I think there's an element of, we look at violence and there's murder and then there's enacting justice, I guess you could call it. And granted, we do need to draw limits because we're not God. But we do have, in a sense, these godlike characters that come in and enact justice on the deserved offenders. And whether we like to accept that within the story of man or not, there is an extreme element of extreme offense when there's wrongdoing, and then this need for things to be set right. And like in a situation like the Equalizer, you have this need for not only this person to be taken out of a bad situation, but that bad situation is just going to morph onto another victim if it's not set right. And that's where I think the difference becomes, where death, so to speak, becomes less of a taking of something innocent or a taking of something undeserving, and it becomes a egregious punishment, or not an egregious punishment. It becomes a punishment on the egregious acts.
Yeah.
That's the only way to silence it. It's the only way to stop it.
And so a little thumbnail sketch of the movie, Denzel Washington plays Robert McCall, who used to be the not CIA, but the DIA agent. Because I guess they had copyright. Just like Lowe's and Home Depot, I guess they couldn't do copyright. So he works at Home Mart, which is like Lowe's or Home Depot. And you can tell through it, he's helping, Ralphie earn his security guard. He's a caring person. You watch how he interacts. He even shows up at night and interacts with Terry, what's her name? Alina, her real name.
Alina. Yep.
Talks to Alina, who is a prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
But as we find, she's not that anyone's going to choose that life on as an option.
Right.
But she's sort of a slave to a Russian mob. Very similar feel as Taken.
Very much so. Very trafficked feel.
Yeah, they feel trafficked. And even later in the movie, when he sort of gets that flash drive from the guy's safety deposit box, we actually see a missing person matching the description of one of the prostitutes on the website.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting because as we talk about this, The Sound of Freedom is a movie that's out there causing a stir, as it were.
Right.
Very similar stylistically of there's a girl who is trafficked that a man goes and rescues.
Right.
And I haven't seen the movie, so that's all I know about it. I think there's the thing that evil happens in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And here is a man who can do something about it.
Right.
And, he goes and then you see him interacting on behalf of the underdogs, on behalf of people with power who are taking advantage of people who have less power.
Right.
To the point that he basically destroys the Russian mafia all the way up to the head of the snake.
Out. Yeah. I was just going to say his famous quote is, "I want the head of the snake." I want to put this to death once and for all. Yeah.
And I mean, that's the whole killing of the head of the snake, that just, even that line harkens back to the work of Jesus. He's going to crush the head of the serpent. He has crushed the head of the serpent. He will set things right in the future. But how he does that is through us, not in doing the murder and the mayhem thing, but typically.
Although at some point, you can't argue that he will rain down his justice when his patience has run out. And I love Robert McCall. He's talking to one of the Russians, and he's telling him, the men I killed, your men, I gave them a chance. They made their decision. Now I'm giving you the opportunity to make yours. And I really kind of feel like it within the timeline of where we're at with from creation to the end of the world. We're in that point in time where God's looking at the depravity of mankind and the sin of mankind. And he's saying, okay, I've enacted my justice on some, and they made their decision. And now before I enact my justice, because of the glory of who I am, it's your chance to make your decision. And I think as humans, a lot of times we don't like that concept that God gives an ultimatum and there's consequences. Right. If we choose an error, there's consequences. Oh, you can't be loving. But when you look at evil and you look evil in the face, which is something that I like about the movie The Equalizer, is It's shown in its rotten core. There's nothing glamorized about the evil. And all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I'm okay if this is done away with. And I think sin is a lot like that. We glamorize sin to where it's palatable, and the concept of it getting wiped out is not palatable until you take away the glamour and you see sin in its just disgusting gore, and you're like, oh, this needs to get dug out, rooted out, and gotten rid of. We need the head of the snake.
Yeah. I think we're going to get into a lot of sort of some identity stuff because of some of the stuff. I mean, the movie opens with this quote from Mark Twain, where he says, the two most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. And in a lot of ways, this is the story of Robert McCall realizing why he was born.
Right.
Like by the end of the movie, you see him, you know, with an ad on Craigslist saying, odds against you, need help. And I think those characters resonate with us because no matter who we are or the circumstances we've been born in, at some point we always feel like the odds are against us and we need help.
Right?
And I mean, you look at the Psalms and that's David is saying this over and over again. My foes are laughing at me. They knocked me in the street. I'm dying. Where are you, God?
It's just this destitute place that we all are at some point in our life, if not the majority of our life for some of us. And this desperation of, I need someone to swoop in. I need a hero.
I need a hero.
That was bad. Oh my gosh. We went there, didn't we?
Unchoreographed, and yet it's still
unplanned, unchoreographed. Yeah, we went there. But no, and Robert McCall has a quote in there too. Where Terry, the prostitute, she's like, he likes to read, in the movie, and he's always reading. He's getting through the top 100 books that every person should read, right? And there's a whole story behind that I won't go into, but the girl asks him, what are you reading now? And he goes, oh, it's a story about a guy who thinks he's a knight in shining armor, but the only thing is he lives in a world where knights don't exist anymore. And I think in so many ways that reflects culture today and where we're at. And yet inside, because of our desolation, our destitution, our desperateness, we're looking for that knight in shining armor. And not just from a feminine needs a hero standpoint. I think as a human soul needs a hero standpoint, we need salvation. And I love that picture with that quote.
Well, I love that you eliminated the gender qualification. Because as a man, I will tell you, I want to be a knight in shining armor.
Yeah.
I want to be the one my wife looks to rescue her in these times of need. But the truth is, I am incapable of being that as much as I might want to be. And I would say my wife feels the same way about me, that she wants to come through. She wants to help me, support me, do all the things that... In his first book he was reading Old Man and the Sea, where he's like, he is who he is. This is a man who knows who he is and does what he does because of that. And the books that he's reading are super, super cool little like nuggets thrown in that describe what he's actually thinking, what he's struggling with. And when he says that knight in shining armor quote, he's walking with Alina after she's been hit. She's got a bruise on her face and he's about to watch her, really get beat up by her pimp, John's the user, right? I don't know the prostitute terms very well.
I'm not going to correct you. I have no clue either, but she's returning to the guy who basically owns her.
Yeah. And that's what he says later is he's like, something is happening that he doesn't like, and someone needs to step in and basically realizing I can do something about it. And I think there's two different stages where we find ourselves in. One is we are much more frequently in the boat of Alina or Ralphie or Jenny, who gets her ring taken.
Ring back. Yep.
than we like to admit.
Yep.
Because I want to be the knight in shining armor, but I'm much more aligned with the person who needs help a lot more of the time.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of those things with these types of movies too, where we get done watching John Wick, and I'm like, yeah, I could kill someone with a pencil. But in reality, I couldn't. In reality, I'd be a cowering mess on the floor because somebody would have decked me, and I'm not capable. But I think we relate to what we want to be when we watch a character like Robert McCall, the Equalizer. And then if we're really honest, at the end of the movie, we're sitting back going, it's not so much that I relate to Robert McCall, it's I want a Robert McCall in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want that character to come in and help.
And the vast majority of us are not being trafficked. We're not being extorted by, bad cops. We're not being held up at gunpoint and forcing to give over our grandmother's ring, the things that we hold most dear.
Yeah. Right.
But yes, we recognize that we can't do it. There's a gap. And I mean, that's the gospel, right? You can call it sin. You can call it humanity. You can call it whatever you want. The fact is there's a gap between what we want to be able to do and who we actually are.
Exactly.
And we need a rescuer. And we all know that whether we want to admit it or not.
Precisely. And Robert McCall, the thing I like about his character, and even as it develops over the Equalizer 2, you learn more and more about who he is and where he's been. I want to be careful I don't, qualify him as a god, but there's elements that he has that to me are kind of mirroring some of those concepts that we have in God, in the Lord. And one of them is, I love how as you watch his character develop through 1 and 2, you see that he doesn't necessarily have a gradient level of trouble that he goes, okay, now I can get involved. Like, you don't necessarily have to be falling over the cliff before he swoops in, right? There's some people, you mentioned Jenny, and she loses her mother's ring because somebody, steals it from her. And that's important to him because it's important to her. Mm-hmm. And then you have a situation like Elena who's being trafficked. Well, I'll give up my wedding ring for a girl who's being trafficked. Like, to me, there's no comparison between those two situations. But he treats both of them as equally important because of his care and concern for the individual that he's going, to help. And he does the same thing in Equalizer 2. There's a man, an elderly man who's lost a family heirloom that he's trying to get back. And Denzel sees that as just as important as solving this other heinous crime issue that's over here. And I think that's a reflection of how God, as our hero, takes us where we're at and the extremeness, the extreme emotion, the extreme need of where we're at, and doesn't go, well, you know what? Paul over here is having a bigger issue right now, Jamie. So we're going to side table this, and I'm going to help him. And if I have time, I'll come back for you. He treats it as serious and as important as it is to the individual.
Well, and I think we, as on the victim side of thing, or the helpless, needing help side of thing.
Right.
I can look and say, well, I'm not being trafficked.
Right.
I don't, my mom's not getting her restaurant burned up. What I have to deal with isn't that big a deal.
Right.
We were like, I can manage because my life, it's that whole comparison thing. My life's not as bad as that, or is like, oh my gosh, my life's terrible. But the consistent thread through the people is what he says: odds are against you. You need help. Because each one of those situations, they were people who were powerless against the system, against the people, against the oppression that were coming against them. There was nothing they could do to not give up the ring, to get up, to fight back against the handlers and Like they were helpless and powerless.
Yeah, absolutely. But on the flip side, the other part that I like about the movie is Denzel doesn't have. See, he and I are on a first name basis. I just want to throw that out there.
It's not like
Denzel
you've
and
got
I,
a
we were talking about this
love
the other
nickname.
day.
Me and
Yeah.
Big D were talking.
Yeah, we were chilling the other day over
D-dub.
coffee, and we were talking about this. No, but we were having a conversation. Oh my gosh.
In your head.
Wow. I've gone there, folks. I've lost it completely. No, but okay, so his character is the kind, yes, he swoops in, he plays hero, he enacts justice. However, he also requests change in the person he saved.
Right.
In Equalizer 1. If you see that in Elena's character, he does all of this with the expectation, not a do this or I won't. So it's not an ultimatum, but he does have a expectation that he puts on her of, okay, you've been taken out. What are you going to do with that gift now?
Yeah.
You know, and it's so poignant because when you think of people who have gone through a situation like prostitution, we'll just use that one because that's the one in the movie. There is an element of story after story. You hear of people who have been saved out of that only to find themselves back in it later because that's, quote, all they know, unquote. And Denzel's, I love one of the quotes his character, Robert McCall, says, when you pray for rain, you got to deal with the mud too. Right. And I like that concept because we pray for, my state right now when we're recording this episode is in a drought. Like we have burn bans. I mean, you can't even legally smoke outside right now. And, we're praying for rain, but it can go from rain to mud really fast.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those things where like we pray for blessing, and blessing and blessing, but we're not always willing to go through what we need to reach the place of peace, reach the place of unity with God, which requires us slogging through the mud and the muck of change, and a heart change and an attitude of change. And I think that's so poignant in the movie because you see Elena we were talking about this before we went on air, but you see Elena looking one way at the beginning of the movie. And then at the very end, it's almost like they have a different actress. She looks so dramatically different. And it's such a reflection of the change that Robert McCall's character is saying, hey, I did all of this for you, but I want to see you flourish now.
Well, and it's really a reflection of the work Jesus has done.
Yeah.
He's like, no, I came so that you could be free.
Right.
And now, what are you going to do with that freedom? You had mentioned this earlier, that everybody that he went to, like even the first guy, he's like, I'll give you $9,800 for Elena's freedom.
Right.
And the guy sort of laughs at him, but he's like, you had a choice to do the right thing. And everybody gets confronted with the choice to admit that they need Jesus, that they need help, that we can't do it on our own. And as you were saying earlier, we don't like that sort of the ultimatum sounding God. We like the grandfather Santa Claus-y God. Right. And I read a book by Tim Keller called Forgive. And it talks about how in today's culture, and we'll talk about a little more of the culture identity crisis. Right. But how in today's culture, forgiveness is almost a bad word. Because if you forgive someone, you're letting them off the hook. Right. And what Tim Keller writes is there are many different forms of forgiveness that aren't really forgiveness. There's forgiveness that doesn't hold them accountable for the injustices that they've committed. And then when you look at God, who is both all loving and completely holy, completely righteous, completely pursues justice. Again, you look at throughout pursues justice for the widowed and the orphans. That's how you do God's will, is you pursue justice. Yeah. You care for the oppressed. You help the people who need help. And you pursue personal change and personal redemption and personal
rejuvenation, I guess, or being reborn, so to speak. I look at the Old Testament and how many times I've had conversations with people talk about the cruelty that is the Old Testament God. As you read about him, sending the Israelites to wipe out entire nations. I mean, it literally says there, wipe out the entire nations. Do not even leave children or the cattle. And it sounds so vicious and so violent. And you're like, how does this equate with the God of the New Testament, who's Jesus? I'm giving my life for everyone, and I want to save you and give you grace. And I think in the effort to embrace the heroism that is Jesus Christ and the grace, we want to ignore the side of justice of God, which is also a form of salvation. But so much in our culture today doesn't see it that way. We see it as cruelty. But if you look at the nations that God was going up against and saying, hey, you're done, there's a history of him giving them chance after chance after chance after chance to change from the evil ways. And one of their most evil ways was child sacrifice.
Yeah.
When they're literally taking children and sacrificing them alive to the flames as a form of worship to false gods. And I mean, the sodomy and the just disgusting nature of these nations. And God's finally like, look, you're done. And we can cheer that in a movie like The Equalizer when he goes in and wipes out the Russian mafia. But then when it comes to the Old Testament, we're like, oh, no, God, oh, you're horrible. How could you worship a God like that? I'm like, no, he's the Equalizer, right?
Right.
I'm dumbing it down dramatically.
Well, and that's what it says is vengeance is mine. We leave the justice part to the Lord because very few people are actually like the bad guys in the movies. Right. I mean, bad guys in the movies tend to be super caricatured, one-dimensional, uninteresting people who you're like,
always Russian, which makes me feel really bad for the Russians. Right. They get picked on so much in Hollywood.
I mean, and there are people who are like that. There are people who are trafficking children. And we've said it before. There are more people currently in slavery than at any point in human history. Slavery 100%. Is a bigger problem now than it ever has been. But we, I think in America, like to sort of blind our eyes to the reality of the world we live in. We like to think it's like a sitcom.
Yeah.
But it's not. And when you sort of wrestle with it, yes, there are people like that. But the reason we don't do the vigilante justice is because we don't really know their hearts. I mean, obviously, if they're trafficking people, they need to be stopped. We need to hold them accountable and just. But tends to be we can't put ourselves in God's place to be judge, jury, and executioner. But we want someone to hold them accountable for the behavior.
And yet, America is one of the, if not the top consumer of the slave industry.
Yeah.
Which we equate it so often with third world countries. But it's kind of like the underbelly of American culture with the pornography and the stuff. And, I don't want to go off into that necessarily, and that's just one of those things is we can make things look beautiful, and you look at Elena in the movie and you look at even the Russian mafias, the places they live and the various places that Robert McCall ends up going to enact his vengeance. Some of those places are beautiful. The women are beautiful. Everything about it is enticing to the basest desires of man: money, greed, sex, alcohol, whatever it is. It's appealing to that side, and it looks great until you flip it over and you see the under muck, and you're like, oh,
the mud. Well, there was a really great scene after Teddy kills Mandy, I think her name was.
Yes.
Alina's friend.
Yes. Yep.
And you see through a screen door, a glass screen door, one of the doors had and as the shot zooms out, you see him through the window sort of moving the body around. And at this next door house, you see a woman cleaning the grill or cooking on the grill. Yep. She's out there. She's completely oblivious to the meaningless, senseless murder that just occurred.
Exactly.
And I think we blind our eyes. We want to pretend that it doesn't exist. And I think this is the part that goes back to that the knight in shining armor, the quote that he says, he's talking about Don Quixote. He's like, this is a guy who believes he's a knight in shining armor, but he lives in a world where knights don't exist.
They don't exist anymore.
And the funny thing is, I was reading an article today in the Washington Post, which makes me sound all intellectual and stuff, doesn't it?
It does. It really does, because I don't do that.
But it was the title of it is sort of clickbaity. It says, "Men are lost. Here's a map out of the wilderness."
Mm-hmm.
And it's written by Christine Emba. I'll put a link, in the show notes and on our website. And her whole point is, several years ago, there was a line about toxic masculinity that came out as a result of the Me Too movement. Mm-hmm. And again, there are men, there are women, but we predominantly focus on the men who take advantage of the power they have. I think the Dallas Willard quote is, the story of most men is being entrusted with power and using it to harm the ones that are placed under their care.
Yeah.
And my goal as a man is to become a type of man who can be entrusted with the kingdom, who can be trusted to take care of wife, family, the people around me. Mm-hmm. And her whole point was that the men today, people growing up today, the teenagers, the 20-year-old men, they don't know what it means to be a man, because everything that they said it means to be a man, they've said is bad.
Right.
Adventure, competition, sort of the dominance. And because it talks about, how men are lonely, they don't have purpose. They don't, again, that idea of purpose pops up, and anxiousless, directionless. It's like, and even the people who are in charge, the professors at universities, what does it mean to be a man? Because all that they're shown is like, no, these are bad, but they don't have this is what it means to be a good man.
Right.
They only know, don't be like this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, and I think it's a tough place for men to be. I mean, obviously I can't speak on it because I'm not a man, but I can speak on it from the female standpoint, where we don't want to be dominated or equated to being less than. But, I don't believe anywhere in scripture does it equate the woman to be less than.
Correct.
I believe it states that we are different than, and I'm okay with that. Also, the other part that we get hung up with as Christian women is the concept of submission. And I totally get why we would get hung up with that, because submission stinks. On the flip side, when we read that one section of women submit to your husbands, and we stop, but then it says, husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. Well, let's think, how did Christ love the church? He was tortured to death so that the church didn't have to die. So there's your equalizer right there. And I'm not going to fight my husband necessarily for that role. I'm kind of okay not having it.
Well, hang on. Because I want to, the challenge with submission, right?
Yeah.
Is, I've submitted to guys who are jerks, who don't love me, who don't treat me well, who are dominating, oppressive, taking advantage of their powerful positions. And by the way, it doesn't have to necessarily be in the confines of marriage. Right. Like again, throughout the whole thing, that Jesus and God has a special heart for widows and orphans, the powerless, the beaten down, the oppressed. Yeah. How do we treat these people? Are we contributing to the situation, even if we don't know them, as that line from McCall? Or is there something we can do? Can we do something about it? Because it wasn't just the torture and death. I love the thing that what Jesus did, he acted with no need for a response.
Correct.
A lot of guys are like, I just want her to respect me. Jesus never asked for our respect. He showed humility. Like you go to Philippians, he humbled himself. He became a person. He became a man.
Right.
He did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. He let it all go. Right. And when you are completely loved like that, it's kind of easy to just let the man love you, right?
Well, and that's kind of what, and in that scenario, in the ultimate scenario, submission is literally that, allowing yourself to be loved. It's not a patriarchal, I'm going to do what my husband says. Because in reality, I think about, the times that I've, quote, submitted to my husband. And usually I get my way. I mean, to the point, like, I've seen him literally stress out about it and be emotionally upset about it, is because he's so intent on making sure that me and the kids are happy. And that means he will sacrifice his sleep. He will sacrifice his physical well-being. He will sacrifice what he wants to do on vacation,
Right.
to make sure that we are happy. And so in the end, you're kind of submitting to being spoiled. I mean, I don't want to downplay it, but in the way that it's supposed to work,
Right.
that's the way that it's supposed to work. But we don't talk about that. We talk about submission in light of a patriarchal community. And the man, in one sense, is either patriarchal and domineering, or they're emasculated,
Right.
because that's such, machismo is such a, demeaning thing to women. And now you've got man walking around going, what am I? I'm not sure what to do. And I can't blame them.
Right.
They get skewered on one side or they get skewered on the other side, and there's no middle ground. And I don't think there should be a middle ground. I think there should be another alternative, and that is allowing you to be men, allowing you to be, you could say, leaders. But like I said, again, in the situation of, if you are doing it the way God intended it, and that's the problem, is that it's been, perverted over time.
Yeah.
But if it's done in a way that God intends it, as a woman, I am, one, getting my knight in shining armor when I need him, but he's also the dude that's like stepping back going, oh yeah, no, she's got this. I'm just gonna sit back and let her fight, because he knows where I'm capable of doing it myself, and he's not gonna steal that from me. And on the flip side, there's this element of anxious need to make sure that I'm taken care of, that my needs are met, that I'm happy, that I'm blessed, that I'm where, I get my 3-hour nap on Sunday afternoon, right? That I want.
My
which
wife
sounds
eats coffee
small,
in bed
but it's
on
a
the
huge
weekends.
deal.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, your wife and I would love each other. I think we could be best friends.
She says sleeping is her superpower.
Oh, yes. Yes. They never throw that out there either, not to get off on a rabbit trail, but when they say, if you could have one superpower, what would it be? I'm like, sleep. Please, sleep. But yeah, and that's where I think, I love how Robert McCall, when you look at his character in The Equalizer at the end of the movie, when he has stepped in and literally dominated the movie and dominated every part of Elena's life to save her, she does not look at him and go, I really could have done that on my own, and I'm really offended that you stepped in and helped, because I was so capable and you have so not recognized that. I mean, everything he did was look at her strengths and what she had potential to do. And he helps clear the way so that she can accomplish that. And at the end, she looks at him with heroic, with an element of heroism. Heroism.
Words are hard.
She looks at him with an element of heroism, and at the same time, he's still setting her free to be the woman that she needs to be, to stand on her own, to fight for herself, to be independent, to have her own thoughts, her own individual power, etc.
To be who she was created to be.
To be who she was created to be. She says, I'm going to go off, she's going to go start singing, and, she has a tape with her music on it and stuff like that. He doesn't go, oh, no, you really shouldn't. I've done all of this. Now you need to go over here and do this.
Right.
To be safe. No, he doesn't do that. He's like, do it.
Yeah, go be who you are meant to be.
Go be who you are.
And the other thing is, he didn't need her thanks.
No.
Like, she never thanked him because she never knew it. All this happened while she was in the ICU.
Right.
And so all she knows is she thinks he left her some money.
Right.
And a ticket somewhere. But she never thanks him for it. And for him, his thanks is seeing Ralphie in a security guard outfit. Mm-hmm. And because of how these movies go,
right,
the person he created in Ralphie actually comes and rescues him at one point.
Right.
Like, he becomes someone that Robert needs.
Right.
which is, again, that's just good writing, because early on he's dragging a tire. Hey, what if you need to pull me out of a burning building? And later in the movie, he needs to drag him, and he's like 190 pounds, whatever. But he doesn't need the thanks. The thanks is in the freedom. The thanks is in knowing that things have been set right.
Yeah.
And
well,
and
they see that he sees.
Yeah.
You go ahead. No.
Well, I was
going to
say, as men, that's part of it. Like I know, like, men demand respect. They want to be recognized, appreciated. And what this article was also talking about was the appeal of sort of the far right, machismo, all this political stuff that I'm not going to get into. But what it is that it's like saying we are actually tapping into something that is core to our masculinity, provider, protector. There are things in us because God has created us differently. Right. It's not a zero-sum game where if a woman gets elevated, I get, decreased.
Right.
But the problem is there's no other alternatives. And that's even, she even gets to the end of the article saying there needs to be someone saying this is what a good man looks like. But nobody can say what that is. Right. Because they're trying to answer that question without Jesus. Because if I'm looking for what 100%. A real man looks like, I look at Jesus. Right. Right. Exactly. He's the epitome. He's the epitome of it. And Jesus, even in the, Palm Sunday, he comes riding in on a donkey, and a lot of people don't understand the cultural significance of that. But, a war horse is what they expected the Messiah to come riding in on, is a war horse, and I'm going to make war. They expected the Denzel version of Jesus, really, when they expected the Messiah. You're going to take out the Romans. I think that's Equalizer 3 because he's in Italy. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Romans did get taken out. When in Rome, right? Okay. We'll have to watch it. Get to the theater. But, he chooses to ride in on a donkey. He specifically requests a donkey, which to the culture, if I'm not mistaken, at that point in time was a symbol of peace. And coming in, or humility even, I shouldn't say peace, but humility, like you had been saying earlier. There was nothing glamorous or puffing up ego by riding in on an ass, for lack of a better word, because that's what they were called back then, right? Yeah. And so he's riding in on that, and they're looking at him going, praise Jesus, and they're excited. And I kind of wonder if at that point was, as they're praising and Palm Sundaying it up, if they're also inside going, wait, oh, what? And if those are when question marks really started to fly at the end of that day, going, where was the war horse? Like the army's ready to rise up and rally behind him. And even before that, like, when he talks to the woman in Samaria and basically asks for water, and no Jewish rabbi worth his salt would even speak to a Samaritan woman. Right. This is, one of the things that I am that makes Christianity so different is the portrayal of women. In that society, women were property. They didn't talk. They did not play prominent roles. And yet the primary benefactors of Jesus' ministry in the New Testament are women. Joanna and Mary and Martha, like, they were financially supporting the mission. He talks to the woman, in the Jewish ceremonial system with the woman who is bleeding. Well, by touching Jesus, he's now ceremonially unclean. That would, got to go through all the rigmarole. But what we see is he takes the time to hear her story. Yeah. He washes his disciples' feet. He engaged, he says, bring the children to me. And he constantly seeks out the people who are oppressed, the people who are overlooked. As we said, the people who the odds are against you and you need help. Right. And yes, we don't want to like put complete parallels between Robert McCall and Jesus, but that's because every comparison is going to fall apart at some point.
Exactly.
But if you look at the people he's fighting against, not as real people, but against like supernatural forces,
Right.
then
Right.
yes, that's what's happening. We are being set free from the things that have kept us in bondage and slavery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 100%. And that freedom is something we cannot take for granted. It's precious, and it was bought with a price.
Yeah.
You know, and there was a lot of sacrifice that went into it that we probably will never realize, as in the case of the Equalizer, but then also as a case of, of following Christ. I don't even want to say Christianity anymore, because I think it's so much deeper than that.
Yeah.
It's that relationship that we have with the God of the universe who sent his only son. And, when we can come to a realization of that heroic nature of God, balanced with the vengeful side of God, balanced with the gentle side of God, he becomes this multifaceted being that really fills all the little, I kind of look at my life like a strainer, like when you're straining noodles, or a colander. I'm not sure which part of the country you're in and what you call it there. But here we call it a strainer in Wisconsin, because that's how we do it. But when you're using a strainer and you're straining your noodles or your macaroni or whatever, there's all these little holes in our life, and they all represent something different, and they all require a different response. Some of it requires the gentle side of God. Some of it requires the straight up confrontational side of God. Some of it requires the vengeful side of God. And you look at the person of Christ and how he embodied a full 360 of all of that. None of us will ever achieve that. Unfortunately, Robert McCall is not going to achieve that. But he is a picture of that when you look at him and his relationships within the movie. There's all these different sides to him. And, when you break it down at the end of the movie, he's just a guy walking in a pair of khaki pants and a polo shirt, talking to a underage girl who's just been saved out of trafficking, and he's gentle and he's fatherly and he's safe. And I always go back to that Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, where Lucy looks at Mrs. Beaver and she says, "Is Aslan safe? Is he safe?" And Mrs. Beaver looks at her and says, "Safe? Safe? He is not safe, but he is good." And that goodness is what becomes the balance to every facet of his being. And I love that. I love that picture. It's like the ultimate hero.
Yeah. In none of those circumstances did the victims realize it was Robert doing it.
Right.
They didn't realize. I mean, the cops did, because he's the one who sort of interjected, but Alina never knows that it was him. Ralphie doesn't know that he's the one who sort of set the cops straight.
Right.
Jenny doesn't know who got the ring back.
Right.
But at the same time, like you said, I mean, there's a time where Jesus threw people out of the temple because of what they were doing. There's times that he would be forceful.
Right.
But he knew when those times were. And that's how we know. We walk with God in this. He's like, God, should I be argumentative? Should I be sort of forceful in this scenario, or where is my strength needed? And that's our question, is where does our strength come from?
Right.
Does it come from, for me, a lot of times it was like almost a strength from my wife or from my kids. Who am I? Where's my identity? Yeah. But when it's from God, then I can be the knight when I need to be the knight.
Right.
I can be the victim when I'm a victim, when I need help. And really, I always need help. Even to try to be the knight, I need help, because there's times I want to, there is times I want to be like, no, this is what I want to do. Do it my way. It's like, no, I need to
I never really do that, but I can see how that would be a problem. Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that aspect.
No. I'm a pretty compliant individual, but yeah.
Yeah, that's you. Low key doormat.
Very, very doormatty. Yep. I love being walked on. It's great.
Yeah, you don't respond to that at all.
No. Not even remotely. Oh, man.
So, Jaime, if people wanted to check out your books, your stuff, where could they find more about Jaime?
They can find more about Jaime at JaimeWrightBooks.com. Jaime spelled Jaime. And I've pretty much got all my links there. Social media, I'm all over the place. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I haven't been on TikTok for a while. I'm tired of dancing, doing little goofy things to try and get people to watch. It's like, wow, this is demeaning to my person. But yeah, if you hit up JaimeWrightBooks.com, you're going to find most of the links to where you need to go. So, and I have a podcast myself. I'm just going to plug that.
Yeah, plug away. Musings. This is that part of the podcast where you get to plug all the things.
Yes. I do Madlit Musings, which is sort of not unlike what you're doing here, but I talk to authors of different books, different styles of books, etc. And we talk about the story behind the story. We try to go into the depths of it, not so much, oh, what's your book about? How did you become a writer? But more like, why did you write this book? And what's your point? And where are we going with this? So it's
I was actually on your podcast once.
You were?
Did it release? I don't know.
It did. And I need to post that to your...
Put that on the to-do list.
I need to add that to my project management.
Wait, and with that bit of information, this hour just got billed.
Yes. Woo!
Yes.
All right. Time's up for the month. We're now overtime. No.
Anything else, either plugs or anything else you want to say about the movie?
Go see it. It's a good movie. I really love The Equalizer. I love everything about The Equalizer. Again, like you said at the beginning, it's not for the faint of heart. It's definitely a violent movie. There's some language in it. And from one standpoint, it's quite unrealistic. I don't know that anybody has ever gone on that much of a human rampage. But it feeds that justice side of you and the hope side of you. And I think when you view it through the lens that we've talked about, the Equalizer this is a really good thing to make you sit back and think and go, where does this fit within? Why is the human story and the humanity within us so attracted and so drawn to these types of films? Is it the violence, which some people argue that's why we're drawn to it and we're desensitized? But I like to argue that it's more than the violence. It's not really the violence at all. It's the cause and effect of what that achieves. Yeah. And you see that in the life of Elena.
The whole idea of setting things right.
Yeah.
And to realize that we have a God that will set things right.
Yeah.
And if we're currently living in a space where we're living in a fallen world where things are very, very wrong.
Right.
To trust that he will sort it out. I don't need to sort it out.
Right.
I'll let him do his work and then let him show me what I need to do as I'm walking through the day and into who I'm becoming and to take care of the people that he's entrusted to my care. Whether you're a man or a woman, I think that applies.
100%. 100%.
So this has been Paul McDonald and Jaime Jo Wright talking about The Equalizer. Like she said, go check it out. Go check out Equalizer 3, just out in studios, out in theaters. And by the time you listen to this, Jaime will have already seen it. She'll probably go at midnight on Thursday night. For it.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us, and we hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?